Welcome back everyone to the SkillCapped 11.19 tier list update. After a monster 11.18 patch, Riot scaled things back a little as we're looking at around 20 changes compared to the 35 from 11.18. Soraka and Sona will be targeted with nerfs as they've shot up in strength tremendously as of recent, while Renekton sees a much needed buff after being nerfed throughout all of Season 11. To break everything down for you guys, we've gathered our challenger players who spend hours playing and researching games in Diamond and below. Not only this, but a thorough analysis of statistics are used to cultivate the most accurate tier list for the majority of elos. But before we get into it, be sure to check out SkillCapped if you want to truly get better at League of Legends. We're the only service that offers a money-back guarantee if you don't climb at least 5 divisions while actively using our service. We do this because our service really does work, and if it doesn't work for you, you shouldn't pay. Learn more at the end of the video or click the link in the description below. So with all that said, let's jump into it. Not a single item change to be seen in 11.19, so we'll head up to the top lane and start off with Kennen. Q damage is being nerfed, going from 85 scaling to 265 down to 75 scaling to 255. AP ratio drops from 80 down to 75%. For solo queue specifically, Kennen hasn't been a very highly contested pick, so this change is likely another focused around the pro scene. What's interesting is that this change is actually just a complete revert of the buff Kennen saw in 11.15. Prior to that buff, we had Kennen rated as a B tier pick, so with this revert, he will be dropping back down. Aatrox will see a significant buff to his W cooldown as it drops from 26 seconds at rank 1 down to 20 seconds. The cooldown stays the same at max rank, but that doesn't really matter as you don't max the spell out till last. Shaving 6 seconds off at rank 1 is huge since you don't put a second point into W until level 14. This will give Aatrox more consistent sticking power throughout early skirmishes and mid-game fights. Aatrox has been on the edge of breaking into S tier in previous patches, so this buff will shift him up in 11.19. A buff to Cho'Gath's Q cooldown is in store as it's dropping from 7 to 6 seconds. 1 second off a spell that you can spam off cooldown in teamfights is a solid buff for Cho. Is it enough to push him back into S tier though? Our analysts don't think so. Cho is having difficulties against the top meta picks like Sett, Fiora, and Camille, so this buff won't do much to alter his strength in those matchups. A tier is where Cho lands for 11.19. Cooldown buffs seem to be the flavor for this patch as Mordekaiser will have his E cooldown reduced from 22 scaling to 10 seconds down to 18 scaling to 10 seconds. Quite a similar buff we saw to Aatrox as Riot is shifting power into the early and mid game without altering late game strength. Throughout the laning phase, 4 seconds off E will open up more windows of opportunity for Mord, which will lead to an extra kill here and there. Especially for the lower elos, Mord has been on the verge of an S tier position recently, so this buff bumps him up for 11.19. This patch is absolutely loaded with top lane changes as Poppy is next in line. Passive cooldown will be reduced from 16 scaling to 8 seconds down to 13 scaling to 7 seconds. Yet another cooldown buff, and this one is pretty impactful for Poppy's lane bully potential. Passive being a ranged spell allows Poppy to spam that off cooldown in melee matchups, and 3 seconds off will add up over time. Poppy is one of the more sleeper top laners in the meta as she can thrive against Riven, Camille, and Aurelia who are highly contested. For now, Poppy will remain in A tier, but we will keep a close eye on how she performs with this buff as the patch moves on and may look to bump her into S for the mid-patch update. Gwen will see a very simple buff to her base health per 5 going from 7 to 8.5. A boost in strength to Gwen's early sustain, but we don't expect too much out of it and will keep Gwen down in C tier for the time being. Renekton mains finally have a set of changes to look at that don't have nerf written on them. Base health is going from 575 up to 590, health per level will be increased from 87 to 92, while W animation is sped up by 13% and the lockout duration drops from 0.525 to 0.375 seconds. Significant buffs to empower Renekton's early laning if he weren't already in such a bad state. Renekton will no longer wear the tag of the worst top laner, but he will only be moving up to C tier for 11.19. A buff to Sion's durability is coming in 11.19 with his W shield going from 50 scaling to 150 up to 60 scaling to 160. Sion's been struggling to find any footing in the solo queue meta over the past couple patches, and we don't see this buff being enough to fix that. Bruisers with true damage like Camille and Fiora are picked a ton right now and are giving Sion lots of issues. B tier is where you'll find Sion for 11.19. So with all those changes out of the way, let's have a look at the complete top lane tier list. Sett continues to thrive as an OP pick, while Tom will be adjusted back up as he's a dominant champ right now and counters many of the meta picks. Singed is flying heavily under the radar after his 11.18 buff combined with the Predator changes. Ghostblade buffs have turned Riven into one of the most devastating picks, especially if you can pilot her well. Don't sleep on Poppy after her buff this patch, as she can do a great job at shutting down contested picks who have mobility spells. A couple champs we'd recommend you prioritize to climb low elo the fastest are Mundo, Yorick, and Garen. Highly valuable ban choices for top lane are Set, Irelia, or Tahm Kench. With over 8 changes covered for the top lane, Riot's keeping it on the lighter side for jungle, as we have 3 alterations to discuss. Gragas is first up, as he'll see an AP ratio buff to W going from 60 to 70%. Riot is slowly trying to buff Gragas without turning him into an OP pick for pro play. They did this by buffing Predator last patch, and since that change didn't do a whole lot, they are going the direct buff approach for 11.19. Gragas will be on the fence between B and A tier after this change, but we're leaning more on the B tier side for now, and we'll keep you guys updated on this for our mid-patch tier list. Another attempt will be made at buffing Qiyana, as the changes last patch didn't achieve anything in regards to boosting her power as a jungler. Q monster damage will go from 125 to 150%, while QE combo is slightly more forgiving for short dashes. In the grand scheme of things, we don't see these buffs being enough to move Qiyana any further up the tier list, so we continue to rate her as a C tier jungler. A couple of buffs to Sejuani Q are headed to live, with the cooldown changed from 20 scaling to 12 seconds down to 18 scaling to 12 seconds. Q damage is also increased by 10 at all ranks. The cooldown buff helps out slightly with Sejuani's early clear speed, but it isn't anything crazy. Most early skirmishes, you'll only be able to use 1 Q anyways, so a 2-second decrease won't be super impactful for those scenarios. Some extra damage on Q to empower her gank potential will be nice though. Nevertheless, Sejuani will be moving into A tier for 11.19, as she has been very close to breaking through in previous patches. So for a look at our jungle tier list, you're going to see a very stable meta as to where it was in 11.18. Jarvan and Amumu will continue to be the 2 picks we rate highly, especially Amumu if you're in the lower ranks. Although Qiyana and Zed are seeing more play after their recent buffs, we would recommend to stay away if your main goal is to climb. The skill required to make each champion work is so much greater than the majority of junglers above them on the tier list. Zed especially, since he is extremely feast or famine, and if you can't amass an early advantage, he offers absolutely nothing to his team. If you're still not abusing the buffed Ghostblade on picks like Kayn, Graves, Kha'Zix, and Shaco, then look to do so before the item gets nerfed. Top low elo picks for 11.19 are Amumu, Trundle, and Jarvan. High on your ban list should be Xin Zhao, Jarvan, and Amumu. A few Ryze nerfs are in order, as these are some pro play focused changes. Q AP ratio drops from 45% to 40%, while E cooldown is going from 3.25 scaling to 2.25 seconds up to 3.5 scaling to 2.5 seconds. These nerfs won't alter Ryze's power level very much for solo queue, but regardless, we wouldn't recommend prioritizing him in the first place. Ryze will be placed in C tier as a below average pickup. Akali will receive a few minor buffs, as her base health per 5 is going from 8 to 9, while health per level is increased from 0.5 to 0.9. This brings back some power into Akali's laning phase, which Riot targeted with nerfs a while back. Our analysts don't expect the changes to be nearly enough to push Akali significantly up the tier list though, as she'll be a C tier mid laner in 11.19. Turns out Riot has decided to chalk the Fizz changes from 11.18, completely revert them, and instead issue a buff to his E. What is it with these cooldown buffs this patch though, as Fizz E will be reduced from 16 scaling to 10 seconds down to 16 scaling to 8 seconds. 2 seconds off at max rank for the spell you max out first is a considerable buff. Fizz E is already extremely annoying to deal with as is, so 2 seconds off will make him even more slippery in those mid-game fights. We will shift Fizz back into A tier and keep a close eye as the patch moves forward, because a push further into S could be on the horizon. Galio wouldn't have been a champion high on our list for a buff right now, but Riot have other ideas. W cooldown will be lowered from 18 at all ranks down to 18 scaling to 16 seconds. A lower cooldown on a point-and-click AoE CC ability like Galio W is pretty big, even if it's only 2 seconds lower. We already rate Galio as an S tier pick, so this buff will only solidify that placement even further. Some laning strength will be loaded into Sylas's kit for 11.19, as his base mana is going from 280 to 310, while base mana per 5 is increased from 7 to 8. Early mana usage is something that can be difficult to manage as Sylas, so some help in that field is definitely welcomed. We'll keep Sylas placed in our A tier for 11.19, but he's very close to breaking back into S with another positive change. So let's transition over to breaking down our mid lane tier list. Uxin is extremely strong at the moment, while Katarina and Zed hold true to that statement as well. With the Kiana quality of life buff, we will be adjusting her back into S tier for 11.19. As a result of the Galio buff, we would definitely recommend picking him up if you're looking for a consistent performer who will always provide something for his team. Other than that, no major shifts in the mid lane meta as the changes were very minor. Top 3 hardest carry picks for low elo are Kale, Malz, and Annie. Recommended bans are the exact same as the OP tier with Katarina, Zed, and Uxin. Varus continues to be targeted with nerfs due to his pro play priority, which is really hurting his viability in solo queue. Q cooldown is increased from 16 scaling to 10 seconds up to 16 scaling to 12. Nothing changes for your early laning, but once you reach level 9 and begin to siege, you'll feel the effects of this nerf. One thing holding Varus afloat right now is how strong Ghostblade is as a rush item. If you do plan on playing Varus, then adapt to that build path, or else he's definitely not worth it for solo queue. We won't be dropping Varus down any further, but he will remain as one of the weaker C-tier marksmen. And with that being the only change we'll see for ADC in 11.19, let's jump right into the tier list. A few new picks have started emerging over the last patch, one being Misfortune. Lethality build combined with her buff in 11.18 has led to a massive rise in power for MF, and she'll be moving into OP tier as a result. The build revolves around the buffed Ghostblade as a rush item into Eclipse second and Cyrilda's Grudge third. You'll also take Comet as the keystone for more poke in lane. With MF rising up so much, we will be shifting Ziggs and Draven back down into S tier. MF is by far the best ADC to climb out of low elo for 11.19, but Ziggs and Ashe are two other great alternatives. Draven, Samira, and Jhin are all good ban options. Sona has been on top of the solo queue support meta over the past couple patches, so a nerf is finally headed her way. Armor is reduced from 28 down to 26. Q will no longer hit enemies that Sona cannot see, and E power chord slow will now ignore slow reducing effects. That Q bug fix is actually quite impactful, as being able to damage the enemy as they walk into a bush was really strong. Base armor going down only makes Sona even more vulnerable early in lane, which is where she can be exploited the most. Our analysts expect Sona to remain a very strong support option, but she will be moving from OP into S for 11.19. Next champion nerfed is no surprise at all, as Soraka ended up way overloaded after her 11.18 buffs. To try and tone her down a notch, Riot will reduce Soraka's ultimate heal from 150 scaling to 350 down to 130 scaling to 300. The fact Soraka ultimate now removes grievous wounds before healing has made her super insane, and even with this nerf, we don't expect a significant power drop. Soraka will lock down a spot in OP tier for another patch as one of the most broken supports. After a few months of dominating the support meta, Seraphine has been pretty non-existent the past while. To account for this, a buff to her ultimate cooldown will be issued, dropping by 20 seconds at all ranks. Seraphine ultimate is an absolute game changer, so 20 seconds off is quite big. With how strong other enchanters like Nami, Sona, and Soraka are right now, we don't see Seraphine being very highly contested, even with the buff though. We'll bump Seraphine up into A tier for 11.19 as a good support option, but there will still be better choices above. So a very light patch overall for the bot lane, which means the support tier list doesn't change much at all. Soraka, Amumu, and Blitzcrank are the most OP picks you can play. It wouldn't surprise us if Riot looks into an Amumu nerf very soon, as he's insanely strong for jungle and support, so if you've been thinking of trying him out, now would be the time. For the first time in a while, enchanters are actually beginning to see more success than aggro engaged supports. Thresh and Leona were just recently nerfed and have fallen in power a considerable amount, which has opened things up for other champs to rise. Soraka, Blitzcrank, and Zyra are the top 3 low elo picks for 11.19. The best bans for the current meta are Lulu, Blitz, and Soraka. Alright guys, before we wrap this up, let's tell you a little more about SkillCapped. So, we offer a 5-division rank up guarantee, and think that's a pretty crazy thing to offer. It's like a gym membership guaranteeing you'll get ripped. Your local gym would go bust if they offered that, right? Not us. We've offered this for years because our service really does work. It works so well, in fact, that we're able to produce by far the largest catalog of premium league guides on the internet. We add over 20 videos a week, with over 1,600 guides curated into over 100 courses no one can compare. We've also sent challenger players into Elo Hell 714 times and counting, where they commentate how to carry live. They also respond to all questions asked. Sign up today for as little as $4.99 a month if you are serious about improving. So there you have it guys, a complete update on the solo queue tier list for all roles in 11.19. Thank you so much for watching, good luck this patch, and we'll see you in the next one.